friends, it's Christy. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be making a card using Mama Elephant's Dandelion Wishes. So I've stamped the images I'll be using on some Spectrum Noir Ultra Smooth Premium White cardstock with Lawn Fawn Jet Black ink, and I'll be coloring with my Copic markers. I'm starting with my raccoon, and I decided to go with cool grays for him. So for the main parts of his body, I'll be using C0, C1, and C3, starting with that darkest shade, the C3, to lay in some shadows around the edges of his body. And I'm also going to color in his tail. I will come back and do the black stripes on that later, but it's easier to just do the whole tail in gray and then do the darker colors over top. So that's what I'll be doing. I blended that out with the C1 and then used the C0 for the highlight. And I didn't feel like there was enough contrast on there, so I did go back in with a second layer, just going right over the shades that I've already done. That's going to increase the saturation and just make those colors a little bit more vibrant. And I think that looks a lot better. Then for the darker parts of his body, I'm going to keep the C3, that's going to become my lightest now, and I'll add to that the C5 and the C7. So I'm going to start with the C7 now for the patches along his forehead and on his eyes, and also the black stripes on the tail. If you wanted to go even darker, you could use the C9, but I always worry about getting too dark when I'm going over the eye area, because if you lose those, they really kind of don't look quite as cute, that you lose their personality if you cover the eyes up too darkly. So C7 is as dark as I went, and then blended that out with the C5 and then the C3. But I did go back and add a little extra of the C7 on the part of his face that is toward the viewer, because I felt like it could just use a little extra contrast. And I just realized that I forgot to color in that little corner of the patch on his forehead, so I'll definitely have to go back and do that. I also colored in his feet and the ladybug's face, and then I'm moving on to my bunny, and I'm going to use some light brown shades for that. E50, E51, and E53. Starting with the E53 and placing those shadows down the right side of the bunny's body since she is facing toward the left. I prefer to put my shadows down the back of my critters' bodies and then keep their faces nice and highlighted. That usually means that my critters will also fall on that side of the card, so they'll be facing toward the center, so I'll have a central light source. I blended out the E53 with the E51 and then the E50, and then used the colorless blender to transition into the white face and belly. And then I'm adding in the E55 and E57 to do the wood stump that the raccoon is sitting on. So I started with the E57 for that and kind of outlined the bottom edges. And then I'm filling in with the E55 and saving a little bit of room there for that E53. Then I'm going to let that dry and come back to that in a second. So while I am letting that dry, I'll work on the cut part that the raccoon is sitting on. I used the E51 and E50 initially, but I decided I needed more shading underneath the raccoon, so I did add a little bit of the E53 there. And then I'm coming back in with that E57 and just doing a little bit of wood grain texture with some little lines and dots there. Then I'm going to move on to my mouse. I'm using W00, E70, and E71. E71 first, and then blending out with the E70, and then a little W00 on the face and belly and ears. I also did the under part of the ladybug's wing with the W00 and the bunny's tail with both of the lighter shades. Then I'll bring in some pink to do some rosy cheeks and color the inner ears. I'm using R11, R20, and R22. I started with the R22 for the rosy cheeks and then blended that out with the R20, added some R20 to the inner ears, and then I'm blending that out with the R11. And I also added a little R11 to the bunny's cheek to blend that out since she's a bit lighter. I'm going to do my ladybug in red. I pulled in R24 and R29, just 2 shades since it's such a small little area. And then I'm going to move on to my mushroom stems. I'll use some E40s for those. E40, E41, and E42. So I'm shading with the E42 for the darkest, adding a little bit of that to the underside as well, like the little frills underneath the mushroom cap, and then blending out with the E41 and the E40. I'm also going to color in the tiny little mushroom stems on the left. I felt like I needed a bit more contrast, so I did bring in some E43 as well, and I did not blend that out. It was saturated enough that I didn't feel like I needed to. Then I'm going to do some yellows. I'm using Y11, Y13, Y15, and Y17. The mushroom caps I'm going to do with all 4 shades, which I know is a lot, but I wanted them to look different from the dandelions, which we'll get to in a sec. So I did use all 4 shades, starting with the Y17 for the shadow, blending out with the Y15, then I added some Y13 and then a little bit of Y11, and I even did that on the small mushrooms on the left. And then once I'm done with those, I'm also going to do the centers of the dandelion puffs with the Y17, and then the actual dandelion flower, I'll use just those darkest 3 shades to make that a bit more vibrant. Then for the greenery, I'm going to use a couple different green tones. For the dandelions, I'm using G24 and G28. So G28 on the little fronds that are kind of hanging down from the top, and also on the stem, a little bit on the base of the leaves, and then blending out with the G24 for the rest of the leaves. For the other leaves at the base of the little chubby mushroom on the right, I'm using YG11 and YG17. And then for the kind of like fern style leaves, I'm using BG93, just the 1 shade because they are super duper tiny. I wanted to do the dandelion puffs with just a little bit of shading, so I brought in BG10 for that. Just went around all of those, adding a tiny bit of color. And then I brought in a black Sakura Jelly Roll pen, which I'm going to get started off to the side there. Just scribble that out a few times until it's flowing nicely. And then I'll go over the eyes of my raccoon and my mouse. And once I'm done with that, I'm going to trim these images out with their matching dies. For my background, I'm starting with a piece of Bristol Smooth Surface cardstock, and I'm going to do a little sky background using the Lawn Fawn Cloudy Stencil and some Tumbled Glass Distress Oxide ink. I am matching some pattern paper that I will be using, so normally I really love Salvage Patina for skies, but I wanted something that was a bit more of a true blue and less of an aqua blue, so I went with the Tumbled Glass, which I think looks really nice as well. It's a kind of a classic look. So I'm going to do about 3 cloud formations. That's all I'm going to need. That's all that's going to show. And then I will also bring in a little bit of green for some grass. I'm just kind of checking with the dye that I'll be using to make sure that I stay kind of where I need to for that to show. So the green I'm using is Mowed Lawn, and I'm just going to add a little bit of that down towards the bottom in kind of a straight line. Only a tiny bit of the green will show. So I didn't need to be too particular with it. I just needed to have a little bit of it on there. I wanted a tiny bit more ink on there so it would be a bit brighter, and then I'm going to set this aside to dry, and I'll move on to my pattern paper, which is going to be from the Cardabella Here, There, and Everywhere 6x6 pad. So I'm tearing out this print with daisies on it, and then I'm going to use a yellow gingham scrap. I've trimmed those down with my paper trimmer, and now I am going to glue them together using some Barely Art Precision Craft Glue. Just gluing the yellow gingham print so that it runs down the exact center of the daisy print. And I'm using the grid mat on my desk to line that up straight. Then I'm going to take the second largest stitched semicircle die from Sunny Studios, and I'm going to line that up toward the top of the card. Make sure that I have the same amount of that daisy print showing on either side, and then I'll tape that into position, run it through my die cutting machine, and pop out the center so that it leaves behind a little window. I'll line that frame up over the background how I want it and pop it down into the MISTI so I can do a little stamping on the background. I'm going to do that using VersaFine Onyx Black ink, and I'm just stamping a few of those little dandelion seeds on the background. And then I'll pop that back out and set that aside. I'm going to add a scrap of white cardstock. It's the same one that I used to do my coloring, and stamp my sentiment. And I'm going to do the one that says "A Million Little Wishes." I'm going to stamp that down twice to make sure it's nice and bold and legible. And then I'll set that aside and pop my card base into my MISTI, which is going to be Lawn Fawn sticky note cardstock. And I'm stamping in Lawn Fawn Sunflower ink. This is a little bit of a lighter ink, so I am going to stamp it down several times to make sure that it shows up, because this ink does dry back a little bit. So I stamped it down 3 times, and I just added another sentiment, the little squirrel, and a few more of those little dandelion seeds blowing in the wind. And now I'm ready to start assembling. So I've added some foam tape to the back of that pattern paper frame so that it can be popped up and have some dimension on the card. So I'm just peeling off those release papers, lining that back up where I want it, and then I'll press that down into place to pick up the background. Then I'll add some liquid glue to the back of the background piece so that I can adhere this to my card front. And that whole piece is the same size as my card. It's a standard A2 size card, 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. So I'll just line that up at the corners to make sure that it's on there nice and straight and smooth that into place. Then I can bring in my images and start to lay in the pieces that I want to be in the background. So some of these are going to be adhered flat into the scene, and some of them are going to be popped up on foam tape. So I'm working on the ones that will be in the back first. And I wanted to add in a few of these extra little dandelions, in various stages of turning to seed, so that it would just fill in the scene a little bit more. So kind of figuring out the placement of all of that first. And then once I'm happy with those background pieces, I will start to glue those into place. And the mushrooms and also the raccoon sitting on the stump are going to kind of be tucked into the edges of the window, just so I have a little bit more room there. So I'm just making sure that I get those situated exactly where I want them. And then I will press everything a little bit more firmly into place. I kind of set the dandelions down gently first just to make sure I had everything where I wanted it before I secure it, because this glue dries so quickly. And then I just wanted to fill in the little grass at the bottom, so I grabbed a YG17 marker, and I decided to do it on the bottom edge of the stump piece as well. And then I'm going to add some foam tape to the back of my bunny. I wanted that to be popped up just to add a little extra dimension into the scene and kind of push the background pieces further into the distance, just to create a bit more depth. So I'll peel off those release papers and figure out where I want the bunny to go. I needed to have just a little bit further with the green there for the bunny, so that I thought it was going to show, but I ended up covering up where I colored anyway, so it didn't really matter. But Kind of played around with the placement of that bunny a little bit until I had it perfect. And then I'm also going to pop up my mouse, but I'm only placing the foam tape down toward the bottom because the top piece I wanted to be kind of like flying out of the frame. So I'm going to put him kind of half in, half out there. And then I just have the ladybug. There's also a bee in the stamp set, so I almost went with the bee because he would have matched with the yellow color palette. But then I thought it might be nice to kind of break it up a tiny bit with the red ladybug. Just have that little pop of another color. So I went with the ladybug, but if you would prefer the bee, you could always add that instead. I trimmed down my sentiment with the Lawn Fawn Everyday Sentiment banner. I used the smallest one and just selectively die cut that to fit the sentiment. And I'm going to glue that right at the base of that little window. And then I wanted to add just a couple of sequins to kind of add a little embellishment to that pattern paper frame. So I placed 2 at the top left and 3 at the bottom right. Just like a little trail. And I'm going to let those dry. I'm going to use the other end of my embellishment wand there to just press them into the glue more firmly. And then I'll let that dry for maybe 30 seconds to a minute. And then I will fill in the holes with some Stardust stickles. I'm also going to add some stickles to all of my dandelion seeds and to the underside of the ladybug's wing, just to have a little extra sparkle. A little extra sparkle never hurt anybody. So that is actually going to finish this one up, and I will lift that up to the camera so you can see all of the detail and give you another peek at the inside. I really hope you guys enjoyed this one. I know this is an older stamp set, but I still love this one. This is one of my absolute favorite Mama Elephant stamp sets of all time, and I just had to use it again. So if you did enjoy it, please be sure to hit that like button. You can leave me a comment down below. I love hearing from you guys. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and ring that notification bell if you want to be alerted whenever I post new videos. The products I use will all be listed and linked for you in the description bar below in case you'd like to pick up anything for yourself. And if you'd like to keep watching, here are 2 extra videos I thought you might also enjoy. Thank you so much for spending your time with me today. I hope you had a good one, and I'll see you soon in another video. Bye-bye.